It is my pleasure today to introduce our speaker. And when I asked him for a bio, he sent me 4 pages. And I thought, oh dear. And then this following sentence, he says, please introduce me as this is James Lowery returning to speak to us yet again. And I give you James. Therefore, I give you James.
Thanks. You'll notice the title of my talk, if you can see on the screen, is a little bit different from what was picked up on the publicity, but it's all the same. It's the same presentation. Just this talks a little bit more about it. So if you have not done it already, you can do speaker view, and that will remove everybody else's images off of your screen. And you can actually move that image if you need to off to the side if it's covering up your the viewing of the slides. So as you can see, this was a trip that my wife and I took in 2007, and I learned so much about the Netherlands when we were there that I turned it into a PowerPoint presentation, sharing that with you today, as well as some other additional information gathered since then. So one of my favorite phrases is life is just a series of coincidences. So here's one of them. I was on the Locust Fork River, the bank of the Locust Fork River, a month prior to our departure, and I looked down in the water, and among the sticks and stuff in the water was something blue. So I pulled it out, and it was actually a cloth, artificial tulip cloth made out of cloth. So I thought that was an interesting coincidence. And also 2 weeks prior to departure, we looked in our front yard. We had planted some tulip bulbs 30 years prior, and they had bloomed that first year or two, and then we had not seen them at all until 2 weeks prior to our departure, and they came up and one of them bloomed 2 weeks before we left. So interesting coincidence also. So our riverboat, as you can see here, is long and narrow and low. It's a typical sort of mini cruise ship, if you want to think about it. Up front is a lounge. In the middle are where the staterooms are, the cabins are that you stay in. And in the back end is the dining hall, which is just a dining room, very nice. So these are all low because they've got to go under the bridges up and down the canals. So you notice this radar mast on the front is actually on a hinge. So if the captain arrives at a bridge that is low, he can lower that radar mast down with the hinge. But also, if he arrives at still another low bridge that's lower than that, the whole pilot house here can be lowered down to deck level to allow him to squeak under the bridge. And so here, this is the opening. As you can see that we would go ashore. There was actually another ship just like ours, another boat on the other side that tied up to us. And so they came out of theirs and through ours to come ashore, because the dock here would not handle 2 of them. And so they would come through ours. So you have to make a lot of things work on these canals and when you've got limited space. So some of the general information about the Netherlands, what's in the name? The official name is Kingdom of the Netherlands. It's the short name for the entire country is the Netherlands. The name Holland, which we, growing up, thought of it as Holland, refers to the country's 2 western provinces, North Holland and South Holland. And the Netherlands literally means the lowlands. So why does so many of the names of the cities and locations end in DAM? For example, Amsterdam, Rotterdam, Volendam. Well, originally they were sites of dams related to the rivers and the dikes and the draining of land. So the Amstel River Dam became Amstel River Dam, talked a little bit faster, became Amsterdam. So that's how Amsterdam term originated. Same thing with the Rot River Dam became Rotterdam. So the size of the country is a small country, about 1/3 the size of Alabama, would easily fit between Birmingham and the Tennessee border. But it is Europe's most densely populated country with 16.5 million people. Its seaports are the gateway to the interior of Europe. There are several huge seaports where the Rhine River meets the North Sea. So one of the reasons for these big seaports is that the Rhine River and the other rivers that come in to the middle part of Europe are coming through the Netherlands to get to the middle part of Europe. So all the products that need to come into the middle part of Europe come through, if they're on river traffic or coming from the sea, they have to come down the rivers through the Netherlands to get to Europe. Same thing with the products or whatever is coming out of Europe back out to the sea have to go through Amsterdam or through the Netherlands and out those seaports. So Rotterdam is the third largest seaport in the world. It's the largest in Europe. So what they have to do, though, is the big ocean-going freighters have to dock, say at Rotterdam, and then unload all of their material onto small riverboats, freighters, that will then take it along on the rivers and the canals into the middle part of Europe. So that's why it's such a big operation at the seaports. So what is a polder? Polder is land that is drained and reclaimed from the North Sea and is now part of the country. So they were making polders was the purpose for building the dikes and having the windmills since the 1200s to pump the water out, because it's always in the soil, just below the surface of the soil, there's always water. So you got to keep pumping that out, even if you have made, quote, dry land out of it. So almost half of the country is polders, and the country is twice as big as it was 300 years ago. About 60% of the people live on polder land. And some of the people are older than the land on which they live. Amsterdam's modern airport is on polder land, and before being drained, it was a site of a major sea battle. So if you've ever flown into Amsterdam, you've flown into an area that was originally part of a sea battle. I'll link it up here. So here's a map showing where the Netherlands is located, tucked in between Belgium and Germany, with the North Sea along the upper side of it. Well, you notice all the river systems here, which are, like I say, are feeding into the middle part of Europe. So here is another view of it showing the rivers and showing Belgium and the Rhine River and the other rivers that are going through there. So the country, it truly is a country below sea level. The blue on this map indicates areas below sea level or areas vulnerable to flooding, either by the sea or by the rivers. The Dutch sea barriers, the arrows over here on the left are showing you where the Dutch sea barriers are, where these rivers empty into the North Sea. Well, they have to have complicated barriers here because the dikes along the land part keep the water out. But when you got an opening from a river, you have to keep the seawater from coming into the river, but you also have to provide transportation openings for the vessels that are going in and out. So here's an old map from 1808 showing the country and showing these areas where the original sea came in. This was salt water originally. And then they made some of that into polder land. So they drained some of it and made polder land out of it. And by putting these, by putting these dikes across, by putting dikes across here, they were able to stop the North Sea from coming in, and this all turned into fresh water because of the rivers emptying into it. So there's huge fisheries here, huge herring fisheries. Well, once that turned to fresh water, then those fisheries were no longer there. So here, this is polder land in circles, and then here it was on that older map before it was polder land. So this was all part of the water, and then they drained it and made it into land. The type of government is a constitutional monarchy. It's the House of Orange. Our queen was Beatrix. She was the queen when we were there, and later in 2013, she turned the throne over to her son, who's the country's first king since 1890. They have a parliament. And in 1584, the Dutch leader, William of Orange, which you may have heard of, was the first head of state ever to be assassinated with a handgun, thus bringing about the new threat of security world leaders, the concealed firearm. So when we were there, the third princess was born and was named while we were there. It was a big deal. The princess was born, and then everybody in the country was anxiously awaiting what the name would be, because they wait for a while before they actually issue and make public what the name. So her full name is Princess Adrienne Wilhelmina Maxima Eins of the Netherlands. So try to teach that to a young child. But anyway, I'm sure they have an abbreviation for her. So again, because of the babies being born, the baby being born, we were there, the flagpoles were flying this orange banner in honor of the House of Orange and in honor of the birth of the baby. Okay. So here's, we were leaving Marken, and there's that flagpole with the orange. Marken used to be a fishing kind of community. And then when the herring fisheries went away, it became more of it's like a bedroom community to Amsterdam and a tourist attraction. So why do the orange carrots, what do orange carrots have to do with the Netherlands? Well, the history of the carrot in the Netherlands, the Dutch folklore holds that the orange colored carrot was developed to honor the House of Orange. However, history does not support that. It's true that the Dutch developed and stabilized the orange carrot, and subsequently the Dutch people adopted orange carrots as their national vegetable. Today, we think of orange carrots as being the norm, but multicolors were prevalent before the Dutch stabilized the orange carrot for major production. To this day, many in the Netherlands genuinely like to believe that orange carrots were originally grown specifically for the House of Orange, but no matter how many times repeated, it's pure folklore. So when we were there, we were able to visit the Queen's Summer Palace. The middle part of the palace has been turned into a museum. And so this is the front of it. And then out back, you'll see these beautiful gardens here that are maintained. So I was here at the front taking the photograph of the front of the building here, and that's where the museum part is. So from, on the front part there, a lot of times around Europe, you'll see clocks that have Roman numeral clock, but this one was unique in the sense that below it was a clock that was based on a sundial. So you can see the shadow here cast here as part of the clock. I had never seen a sundial clock on the side of a building. So this is from inside the Queen's Palace in the museum part, looking out at those beautiful gardens on the back. And then we also were in the Dam Square in Amsterdam, downtown Amsterdam, and we saw this building in the distance here. So we thought, well, we saw the Summer Palace, so we'll go and see the Royal Palace and go in the Royal Palace. Well, we got to the front door, and there was a brass plaque that was attached beside the front door. The front door was locked, and the brass plaque said, "Closed due to circumstances." Well, what does that mean? So we didn't know what the circumstances were, but this is on the right is the North Church. In Amsterdam, they're very high on reusing buildings that they no longer need for their original purpose, reusing them for another purpose. So the North Church here had been turned into a museum. So the pews have been taken out, and they had made it into an art gallery. And then in the front corner there was a gift shop for the gallery. So very interesting reuse. Well, one of the princes wanted to get married in the North Church. And so they took all the artwork out, took the gift shop out, put the pews back in. He got married in it as a church, and then they turned it back into a gallery. So very creative. Also in Dam Square, this is that building we wanted to go into, the palace we wanted to go into. And Dam Square is a circle here, and underneath it is a marker, and it's a reference point for the heart of European network of national leveling networks. So you've got to have some spot that is designated as sea level, zero sea level. And so the bolt underneath this round plate here is a 0 point for all of European network of leveling. Some general information. The Pilgrims had lived in the Netherlands for many years before leaving the Netherlands to found the Plymouth colony in the New World. And I understand that one of the reasons they left the Netherlands, went back went to Plymouth, was they felt like their children were becoming too Dutchified. They were picking up too much of the things that the Netherlands just lived with all the time. And so they went to Plymouth and then to the New World. The capitalism system as we know it today was invented in and first used in the Netherlands. One person in his house in Amsterdam, a merchant, began selling shares in the Dutch East India Company. And in so doing, he created the first stock market exchange and the capitalist global economy that we know of today. Some more general information. Flowers are a huge crop, but the country is a lot more than just flowers. There are hundreds of millions of bulb-based and cut flowers, not just tulips. It's the largest grower and distributor of flowers in the world. And some of the flowers that are cut one day, that are purchased in the auction and are packed up one day, the next morning, those may be in a flower shop, a florist shop in New York City. So they're sending them around the world. Why so many flowers are raised and shipped from the Netherlands? Well, it's a great soil. It's a sandy, loam soil with clay in many areas. It's only rock in the southeast part of the country. Water is always just below the surface of the soil because remember, they're having to keep it pumped out. And the climate is exactly right in a strip of land 10 miles wide by 60 miles long. The people are the tallest people in the world, but the people who were children during World War II often are shorter because of inadequate nutrition during the war. Sometimes all they had to eat were the tulip bulbs, and they learned to make different dishes like tulip soup, tulip mash, fried tulip, roasted tulip, etc. But they had to be careful not to use bulbs of crocus, hyacinth, daffodil, gladiolas. Those are poisonous, so they had to be careful just to use tulip bulbs. The type of building construction, mostly brick construction, especially houses and older buildings, streets, sidewalks, as we'll see, because there's very little rock found in the country, but the soil is a high clay content, and so bricks can be made from it easily. And we'll see that the bricks are turned sideways and laid in sand to provide sufficient street support. The roofs are mostly thatched or clay tile, some very few asphalt roofs, but a lot of clay tile and thatched roofs, as we'll see some examples. So here's a thatched roof out on the farmhouse. Another one. And this is in town. We were on the bus driving through one of the major cities, and you'll see a thatched roof, then a clay tile roof, thatched roof, maybe an asphalt tile roof, clay tile roof, thatched roof, just as you drive along on the streets. Van Gogh's Cottage at Nightfall was a thatched roof. So what does it look like? This is a thatched roof, a typical one. So it's a lot of reeds laid on each other that create the thatched roof. And they're still being used, still being built, used for roofing. So this is downtown Amsterdam from our hotel window, looking at the Amstel River. And then this is the older downtown part of Amsterdam, as we'll see. So the narrowest house in Amsterdam is this one, number 7 here, only as wide as the doorway. And the reason is that the amount of taxes was based on the width of the front of the house. So you wanted that to be as small as possible. Sometimes it would open up in the back and be wider, of course, but you wanted the front to be as small as it can be. And here's a cute little setup of houses. So this was a house here, and then they redid it, remodeled it, and when they did, they left 4 inches here between it and the house next to it. So they put some whimsical little 4-inch wide facades here of what this looked like before they redid it into a modern setup. So since the houses are so narrow, then you need to be able to get to the second floor, but you don't want to waste a lot of room on the first floor with the wide stairway like we have in normal houses. So you have a very narrow stairway going from the first floor to the second floor up to the third floor, but you have to get furniture up that very narrow stairway. So that's usually hard to do. So what they do is they come in and they put a hoist hook up here at the top. And so they, with the hook here, they can put a pulley and a rope coming down, and they can hoist up the furniture for the second floor, third floor, and even for the attic storage here. Well, to do that, you don't want the furniture banging against the side of the wall. So oftentimes you make the houses leaning out. So the hoist hook is sticking out farther here. And here's an example close up of one of those hoist hooks. And you'll notice that they have shutters on these windows that they can close to protect them when they're bringing the furniture up with this hoist, whereas the windows on the others on the sides do not need that protection. And here's a building that was being built, and then it started settling. And so you can see that it is curved at the top, or tilts a little bit at the top, because being built on very, very wet soil. This building has been floating in groundwater for centuries. So its basement is actually floating in the groundwater. And as you can see, it is tilted a little bit through the years. And then this church, when they were building this church, they started building it, and then it started leaning. The steeple started leaning, and so they tried straightening it up a little bit as they built it, as they went up. Bicycles, 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 very flat country. And there are more bicycles in the Netherlands than there are people. And some bicycle lots cost more than the bicycle. We saw all ages of people riding bicycles for all purposes. A family, a woman and her children leaving the grocery store to go home, and she had children on the handlebars, she had children on the back, she had the groceries, so they're used quite a bit for transportation. No, we only saw 2 bicycle helmets in the entire time, the entire week that we were there, and those were probably foreigners who were wearing bicycle helmets. During the middle of the night, I got up and looked out the window in Amsterdam, and I saw a car light going by and a tiny bicycle light going by on the same street. Most streets and areas, there are more bicycles than there are cars, as you can see parked here. And then this is a bicycle parking deck, multiple levels here. All these are bicycles, no cars. And there's 7,000, it will hold 7,000 bicycles, and this is downtown Amsterdam. So if you're coming to work in downtown Amsterdam, you can ride your bicycle and either put it in the parking deck, or you'll see all along the side here by the canal, the bicycles are also put there. So if you come out and someone has taken, you didn't have a bicycle lot, someone's taken your bicycle, then you just grab somebody else's bicycle and ride home and come back the next day. And, you know, it's sort of a semi-sharing operation. So if space is limited, you have to stack the bicycles, as you can see here, or not, just a sea of bicycles. And here's a major bridge that was built in Utrecht only for people walking and bicycling. So this whole major bridge across the river here, as you can see, the slope going up to it is a circular, so the bicycles can get up easily. And so there's a bridge built specifically for walking and for bicycles. Birds, 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 lots of birds, mostly waterfowl. This is downtown Amsterdam, De Spire Hotel. Just lots of beautiful birds. Waterfowl. It was a deep diving bird, and we would see him go down, stay down a while, and then pop back up, feeding on the bottom. Magpie, we had never seen magpies, and they were all over in the cities and countryside. We saw no pigeons or rock dove. So apparently the magpies in some of the cities over there have sort of taken the habitat of what we see here as pigeons in the urban area. Out in the countryside, beautiful magpie. And then herons, lots of herons, there's lots of water. So lots of herons, and here's one in a set of reeds. Here's a heron and a duck along the side of the canal here. And I like this picture I took showing the herons standing on the post and all the yachts and boats. And we're walking along in one of the communities, one of the cities, and there was some houses, and I heard this squawking, loud noises up in the trees in the backyard of this house. And I looked up, and there were heron nests up there in the trees, just right in the person's backyard. And two different places I saw cages like this outside with tropical birds in them, tropical birds up by the North Sea. So you see all these parrots and parakeets in the cages here. And one of them was in a city park. They had an aviary and where the birds could come outside also. And they were all tropical birds, so very surprising. Here's one that built a nest, and it's a floating nest. If you build a nest on the water, it's got to be a floating nest. So it made it a floating nest. Lots of swans, beautiful swans, lots and lots of swans in the country, as you can see here in the gardens. Here's one right next to the little footbridge where we're going over to a windmill to see the windmill. And then our boat was parked in Amsterdam on the Amstel River, and I heard a crash. The window was open. It was a beautiful day. I heard a crashing in the water, and I looked out, and a swan had landed in the water right there in downtown Amsterdam. And then one of them decided to cross the Amstel River. So here's the swans starting to swim across the Amstel River. So a riverboat, and this is what a boat that they have, a freighter that they have unloaded the seagoing vessels onto this size of river freighter. They'll take the products into the middle part of Europe. You'll notice the mast here also is on a hinge. And so the swans start swimming across the river, and I love the name of the boat. It's the Hazard. And so you see the swan is having to wait and give the right of way to the boat as the boat goes by. And then once the boat goes by, it continues its swim across the Amstel River. So downtown Amsterdam, especially the older part, is a network of canals and streets. So if you look at the sort of concentric circles here, you'll have a sidewalk, and then you'll have the canal, sidewalk, land for buildings, sidewalk, canal, sidewalk, buildings, sidewalk, etc., all the way through. So all these canals are active in the sense that they're there in order to continue pumping the water out of the land, or else it would flood. The North Sea shoreline is being held back by dikes. And you'll notice that they have made this into Polderland, but they continue to have to pump the water out because it's below sea level. And then farmland, this is farming land on the polders, and you can see the crashing waves of the North Sea. In Amsterdam, as in a lot of the cities, you have canals, and a lot of them have canal boat tours, canal tour boats. And so here you'll see up and down those canals are these houseboats. So a lot of these are converted freighters that have been those early sailing freighters. But a lot of them have now been converted into houseboats and parked up and down the canals. Here's an example. The hull is from one of those freighters, and then they built a house on top of the freighter. But it's not a free ride. If you park here, you have to pay a water tax for the right to dock in the canals. So you don't get away from the property tax, but it's a water tax there. If you want a deck connected to your houseboat, then you have to make it a floating deck. And those are ever-present bicycles here. Every kind of boat, we saw every kind of little boat you can imagine. Canoes, kayaks, motorboats, every variety you can imagine. Here's a 3-decker. This is a freighter. And you notice it's got 3 levels here. It's been converted into a houseboat. A smaller one, you can see the ever-present canoe there for getting around. If you have a backyard and you've got a house here on the water, then your backyard has to be a floating backyard. And I like the fact that they use tires for the landscaping, similar to what we used to do in the United States. And here's a riverboat cruise, riverboat going up and down with tourists on it. And you'll see they have to have a lock system here and have to open and close the lock doors. So here's a lock operator's house of the past. It's been converted into a restaurant. So the lock master and his family lived in this house, and it was his job to control the lock here and open and close the doors when the boats were coming through there. Ever-present bicycle, of course. In Markham, you see the canals, again, to remove the water from the land. And then here's a series of houses backing up to the water, to the canal. Notice a John boat. Like I said, every kind of boat you can imagine is being used there. Sailing ship of the old days is still operational. There's a training vessel. And here you can see very small cars are used in the Netherlands and very small delivery vehicles because land is a premium. So it costs a lot to have a parking place in the Netherlands, but also the streets are small, and also you want to conserve fuel, so the cars are all small. But if you want to go from your house to a friend's house, you might have a boat there that you can use to go up and down the canals to visit people. Apparently there are fish in these canals. Here's a person who is fishing in a canal in one of the major cities in Amsterdam. And the canals, the water, sometimes it looks a greenish color, but it's it doesn't smell. There's no odor because it's always moving. It's being pumped out. And so it's good water in that sense, that it's not an odor, giving off an odor. And here's a walking bridge and former driving bridge like wagons over this canal and going out to the entrance here. So a lot of times what would happen is as you're coming along in your boat, you have to get out and manually raise this drawbridge to get through there, especially in a sailboat. So oftentimes there will be a person on the land here walking along with you. And so when you get to one of these bridges, that person will raise the bridge for you and then close it when you get past. Well, at the end, they'll hold a wooden shoe out on the end of a broomstick and ask you for a tip for having provided that service for you. Some of the canals are over major highways. And when we were in this one, a yacht pulled up, a sailboat rather, pulled up beside us. Notice the windmills in the background here. They're providing electricity. They put a windmill anywhere that they need electricity out on outreaches like that instead of running wires and producing hydroelectric. A lot of lichens. It's very moist air in the country. So a lot of lichens even growing up on the tops of the buildings. And then the linden trees down here at the bottom have been pruned on purpose like this, because then in the wintertime, when they put out their leaves, they provide windbreak and provide shade. So they're purposely trimmed like that so that they will do that part of the season. This very old church was built with a water cistern underneath to catch the roof water, rainwater, off of the roof and to reuse it for the town. When we were there, we had beautiful, wonderful weather. It was sunny every day. We were very lucky because even the locals were talking about how wonderful the weather was. And because of that, since it's very moist normally, we saw a lot of the houses with the bed linen hanging out, airing and drying out outside the windows there. Very old past is meeting the future all the time. So this is a fish market that was in business, has been in business ever since over 100 years before Columbus sailed to the New World. And then we just be driving or walking along. Here's a building was built in 1602, just a lot of old buildings. This was first windmill we spotted. And this was in downtown. As you can see, they have built this one in the past, raised up so that it will catch more of the wind as they have built buildings around it. which would block the wind. So they just built it with a stage up above. Notice all the different variety of boats that people used to get around. This is in Rotterdam. It's showing you the windmill that's in the midst of the modern development. New condominiums were built beside or near Amsterdam and right on old Polderland. So this was reclaimed land on which they built new condominiums. And there's one of the sailing vessels of the past that's still operational. The Citadel is Europe's first floating apartment complex, and it's floating to handle rising sea level, as you can see here. And this is the interior of those condominiums. And then here's a whole neighborhood that is floating. So all of these houses are floating so that they'll handle the fluctuation in the water. Another one here, see this whole neighborhood here is all these are floating, including the walkways that connect the different floating houses. And if you don't have a swimming pool, you can swim in the canal. And then this, putting up the Christmas lights, you can see the neighborhood here. It's a real neighborhood, but it's all floating as you move around. Floating conference center was built here out on the water. And so if you have a conference center, it'd be nice if people can have a view of trees, but those have to be floating trees. So here they have made little rafts here, and the trees float in the water to give a view of the trees. Here's a floating boat, which has been converted to a drug abuse rehabilitation facility sitting on the water. Floating Chinese restaurant in Amsterdam. Floating flower market. So this is the older buildings with the street and the sidewalk here in front of them. And they've got the flower market is floating beside the street there. A cat house or cat boat that is a home for cats, been there since 1966 for stray, sick, and abandoned felines. And so it's a floating cat facility there. And in Europe, from what I understand, most of those towns and a lot of the cities just end, and then the countryside starts. Well, you know, in the United States, we sort of stick fingers out, suburbs out here, suburbs out there. We sort of lose that concept. But here's an example of the edge of a town, and then a wall separating it from the true countryside with it showing a magpie, a swan, and then the horses there. So we were there, they were constructing this movie set. And what they're doing here, the movie that was being filmed, this is an old building here, but they needed the building to look like an even older building. So they were putting a facade across the front of the building to film the movie. And right there beside that, you'll notice this old cannon. If you have an old cannon laying around and you need a barrier so the cars don't drive up on the sidewalk, why not just bury the front of the cannon down and use it as a barrier? You notice that the bricks here are all laid sideways. They're laid on edge, and this street has been here for centuries, handling truck traffic and all that traffic. Same thing with the sidewalk. So in the United States, when we do this, or we make a brick driveway, we lay the bricks flat. Well, that's the least support that you can have for bricks. And here's the way that they lay them there on edge, which gives you more support. It's just like laying a 2x4 one way versus on the edge, you have more support. So the bricks are laid on edge. It may take maybe less than a third more bricks, but what you get is the support there. You'll notice most all the bricks that you see on people's driveways or whatever, a lot of them are cracked because they're not laid edgewise. What we do in the United States, the ones around the border is the ones that we lay edgewise instead of the ones that are expected to support cars or traffic. So they do it the right way, and all they have to do is lay it in a bed of sand and they're good to go. So former cargo boats, like I said, are often used for pleasure boats and converted to houseboats. There's an example of a pleasure boat from the old days. That was a freighter originally going up and down the rivers. Peggy and I were very surprised to see this monkey puzzle tree. We had seen monkey puzzle trees in their native habitat in the Andes in South America, but here was one right up against the North Sea, and it was in somebody's yard as landscaping. It's a living fossil, it's most primitive living conifer. Well, this is close up of that tree, and all of these are spikes. So you can imagine why maybe it has lived all these decades, these real millions of years, if no animals can really handle this. And I've also seen them in Punta Arenas as landscaping in South America. So if you want to go to McDonald's, you can either drive to McDonald's and go through the drive-through, or you can go on your boat up the canal and around to McDonald's from your house. Reuse, I mentioned reuse of buildings for other purposes. This was a church that was no longer needed and they were going to tear it down, but someone said, why don't we convert that? So they built condominiums up in the attic part, children's clothing store in the sanctuary part, and then an adult clothing store in the lower part. So there's a sanctuary converted to a children's clothing store, and there's the first floor as an adult clothing store. Same thing here, church no longer needed, and so it was converted to an indoor skateboard facility. So the city gates, I fell in love with the city gates. They're very, very old. Nearly every city we visited had at least one. And they originally were part of the walls that surrounded the cities for protection. Back in those days, you had a walled cities for protection. Well, you had to get in and out of those walls or through those walls. And so everywhere there was a gate through the walls, they would have a city gate that was for protection, to protect the entrances. So a lot of them were built by the rivers to protect the rivers. And here's an example in Amsterdam of a city gate. And remember, this is a little fort. It was protecting the river here. Notice all the bicycles just parked along the sidewalk there. So this was the one that Henry Hudson sailed from in 1609 when he founded New Amsterdam. And this is the inside. It's now been turned into a tavern and deli. You notice the thickness of the walls here because it was a little fort. And so it had to defend the opening to the river. You see the steel, metal doorways here in that building. Here's another one beside a canal. This is medieval era. And you can notice the little slats here in the walls. Those are to put your guns through for protecting the canal here at the dam. Here's one in Amsterdam, built in 1488, been converted to a restaurant. Again, see the slits in the walls to be able to protect the canal there. It's right beside the canal. Inkhausen, the same thing, a beautiful one, built in 1540. And again, the holes here are for putting your guns through to protect the entrance through the city wall. And here it is viewed from as we were leaving. There's the city gate, and then there's the church that has a cistern under it, several churches. This is a city gate in Horn, 1532, been turned into a tavern. Another one in Horn that's right beside a canal. Right here is the canal, and this is an apartment. So they've got an apartment with people living up there, and the steps inside here to go up to the apartment. City gates in Edam. Here's the houses. The backyards have these city gates in them. They were used to protect the canal here from enemies. In Arnhem, there's one that's in the process of being restored here when we were there. Delft, 2 spires, one right beside the river in Dordrecht, again for protection of the river. Rotterdam, right by the river. Just beautiful structures, all of them different. So now you're asking me, what about the windmills, James? Well, windmills, old and new. are in the Netherlands. There were originally about 10,000 windmills, and they were tearing a lot of them down. And then they realized, because they didn't either have electric pumps now on electric motors and engines. So then they realized that these actually could be a good tourist attraction. So about 1,000 of them remain. And they originated in Turkey. Windmills originated in Turkey, and the concept was brought to the Netherlands to use there, mostly to pump water, to make the polder land and to keep the water pumped out. So there were polder mills, but some of them for grinding grain and some for sawmill operations. You notice this one also is built up on a stage, built up higher so it would catch more of the wind coming through there. But there are also modern windmills. Like I mentioned, if they need electricity out in a remote area, they'll just stick a windmill up instead of trying to run electric wires from an electric generating plant. And then there's just shows you the massive size of these windmills. This is a little sailboat down here that's not all that little, and you'll see the size here. So in the next little video, you'll see some of the modern windmills operating. The noise you hear is the noise of our boat. It's not the noise made by the windmills. And you'll notice that the one on the right-hand side is not operating, so it's not headed into the wind. And then Peggy and I were in South Korea, in Busan, which is the second largest city in South Korea. And you probably hear people saying, well, you know, it's not enough wind in big cities with all these buildings to have a windmill producing electricity. Well, I looked out our hotel window, and down here in the distance was a windmill, right? It tucked in amongst all the buildings, and it was operating. You see right in the middle here, it was turning from the wind. You notice it sort of tilts a little bit as it follows the wind. So you can put them in cities if you have the wind. So this is, we went out to the area that had the Kinderdijk area that has a lot of windmills. So I'll just show you some pictures of those. And these have been maintained. These are all operational. It takes 2 years of training to be a windmill operator. So if you want to buy a windmill and live in it, and the families did live in them, and they do now, then it takes 2 years of training for you to be certified as a windmill operator and to take that windmill and operate it. So the water comes in from a canal. The water comes in here and is pumped by the windmill turning, pumped up to the next level. And then there'll be a windmill to take it from that level up to the next level until it gets out to the rivers. And I like this with the wake of the ducks swimming by. So this is a typical windmill. We're going to see the parts of that and how it operates. So the top up here is the stage, the top stage, and it rotates, it turns, but it's a massive structure because it's where the gears and where the shaft is coming up here from the wings here. And so you've got to be able to rotate that to keep these wings into the wind, facing into the wind. So this is a rotating structure coming to the ground here that it's got a big wheel and it's got a chain on it. So there are concrete posts all around the windmill here. So you attach that chain to one of these posts, turn the wheel, and that will pull the stage and turn it around to face the wind. So it's a constant operation. It's a constant thing that you have to be cognizant of and do. So you rotate it into the wind, but when the vanes are moving, when the wings are moving, if the wind gets to be too high, more than like 35 to 40 miles an hour, they have to shut those wings down and not let them move because all of the gears inside and shafts are wooden gears. So this is a brake coming out from the stage here. It's a brake with the rope coming down. So you have to pull the brake here and pull it down to stop the windmill turning. Okay. So there are bedrooms here. And Peg was pointing out the cap here that rotates. Oh, okay, sorry, I was calling it the stage. The stage is down here, sorry, thanks. So the cap here is what's rotating. So the family lives in the windmill here. And so the first floor is usually the kitchen and dining area. And then the bedrooms are up here in the upper part. the next levels, but you don't have a lot of room inside here. So the beds are built into the wall. So you also, when you're down here, you have a doorway coming into your windmill, but you have two of them, one on both sides. Because if the windmill wings are turning here, because the cap is facing this way, then you can't use this door. You have to use the door on the other side. So you always have two doors available to you. So these beds are interesting. Well, here are the wooden gears, as you can see, they're inside. And so that's why you can't let them turn too fast or they'll burn up. And there's a diagram showing the wings, the shaft, the gears, the brake, and then that converts the energy to this shaft, which then turns either a paddle wheel kind of construction underwater here, or an Archimedes screw, as we'll see here. So here's the Archimedes screw in a modern pump. And these date back even before Archimedes. They were used in the Babylonian period. So here you can see how those move the water up, and they move much more water faster than the actual paddle type of pumps that we have and use a lot in the United States. So here's the windmill wings, and you have a sail here that you can add out to the side here if you need to catch more wind. But you can also bring that over and furl it. So here's that big wheel that you tie the chain onto one of these concrete posts, turn the wheel, and that pulls this gigantic structure connected to the cap and rotates the cap as you go. And this is a shaft, vertical shaft inside, and you can see how much room it takes up, the whole workings in here. So that's why your beds are made into the wall. Here's an example of a pressed bed, they're called, in the kitchen wall. And there's a closet bed. And then a box bed, it's called, made into the wall to save space. So the Polder Mills were the ones that were built in order to pump the water out of the land and into the North Sea or into a local river. So the windmills lined up this way were used for long distance communication among the windmill operators and others. So the windmills could communicate by long distance because you could see them in the distance. And the position the wings were left in when the windmill was not operating communicated information to the neighbors. When it was at rest, it generally was set in the St. Andrew's cross, X kind of position. And then the traveling millwrights knew that a mill needed repair when the cross was crooked. So to indicate a happy event in the family, the wings were set to form an upright cross leaning slightly to the right for joy, like they had a new baby born or something like that, or lean to the left a little bit to indicate sorrow in the family. During World War II, when the Netherlands occupied, the wing positions were used by the resistance to communicate over long distances without the Germans being aware of that communication. And in the old days, when the Catholics were persecuted in Holland, a white rag tied to a wing of a windmill showed that a priest had come to say mass, so people could come gather there. So here's just a painting that's done by a local artist here in Birmingham on a note card. And you'll notice here, this is set at St. Andrew's cross kind of position. And that's the least likely to be hit by lightning. It's one of the reasons it's set like that. But then this one has a wing slightly to the left, meaning a sorrowful event in that family. Farms and farmland all everywhere, canals everywhere with the pumping of the water out. Some farms, you cannot reach the farm except by canal, by boat. Don't even have a driveway to them. So here's an example of Polderland that had been reclaimed, and they had to put a dike separating the river from that land, and then they have to continually pump the water out of this land up into the river at the higher level. So farming amidst the waterlogged Polderland, it must be pumped out continually. It's great soil for farming though. And some farmhouses can be only reached by water, as I mentioned. The farmers still wear wooden shoes because of the water-soaked land and for protection from animal hoofs. Bouncing on the peat with water just underneath, you can do that sometimes in some places. And I've seen on TV a person with a 10-foot pole pushed it down into the peat that they were standing on, and the water started just 1 foot underground, and then as it pushed the pole down, there was nothing but water for 9 feet down. So you always got to keep that pumped out. And pole vaulting was done on a farm and still is. If you've got farmland and you've got a little canal there, sort of like an irrigation ditch for us, got a little canal there and you need to get across to the other side of the little canal, then they'll have a pole and the farmer will pole vault, running and putting the end of the pole in the canal and swinging over, and then leave the pole on the other side. So when he comes back, he's got the pole ready for the return trip. So here's some houses built below the water level of the lake here, as you can see with the dike holding the water back. So the tulips, there are tulips and many other flowers. We were on the bus driving through the tulip country. Just some beautiful pictures here. And even from the airplane, when we were leaving, you can look down and see the tulips and the bulb-based plants being grown. So the gardens that most popular public garden there is the kitchen garden. It's called a kitchen garden because it was originally the herb garden for the castle that was there. And then they've turned it into a public garden, public facility, and just all sorts of flowers grown there. And some 150-year-old beech trees just thriving. If you may know that beech trees love to have wet feet. So you'll see them up along all the banks, along the Cahaba, Shades Creek, all of our local rivers. And there was a line of 150-year-old beech trees thriving and enjoying the wet soil. There's a butterfly in the hyacinths. So what about Dutch doors? You may have heard of Dutch doors. When we were growing up, we saw more of these in people's houses. So why are they split in the middle? You'll notice the bottom here, and then there's a split. You can open the top independently of the bottom. And the reason is this is right on a canal. So if a boat comes by and makes a little wake, it'll splash the water up against the door. Well, if you want the door open for ventilation, then you have to have the top, you can have the top open and still have the bottom closed to handle the water wake. So here's an example of that. This top of the door is open, but the bottom is closed to handle the water. Even old ornate doors are split to handle that same sort of thing. And then here's some of those kind of houses or apartments and houses built right up to the canal for convenience. You can come on the canal, step into your house, but also you have to handle that water. So what about the wooden shoes? Wooden shoes are called klompen or klomp. Why wooden shoes? It's a country with lots of water, lots of rain, lots of wet soil. And so the wooden shoes keep out the dampness better than leather shoes, and leather shoes do not dry out quickly. The farmers and fishermen often wear them when the weather is wet. And the wood to make the shoes was a lot cheaper than leather or other materials. For farmers, they provided protection for their feet to keep them being stepped on by the farm animals. So here's a gift shop in one of the factories that's making the wooden shoes. So they had a girl demonstrating how the wooden shoes are made. So in the old, this is a plug of wood, willow or poplar. They soak it in water first, or else it'd be too hard to work with. And so then this is the old way of doing it. You mount the plug here, and you have a chisel with a big handle, and you chisel out the wooden shoe. But nowadays they have a lathe kind of machine that's got chisel on the end, and it's using This is a block to be cut. And these on the wall are all the different sizes and shapes for the wooden shoes. So that's the guide here for the machine. And so she can run the machine and cut the same size type of shoe out with the lathe. So wooden shoes, I found this fascinating. We were at one of the windmills, and inside the windmill operator had his boots hanging up. So they're wooden shoes with the rubber tops made onto the wooden shoes. And here's the windmill operator at that windmill, and you can see him wearing his wooden shoes because of the wet soil. So now just some general images, and we'll finish up. Remember, I mentioned the freight boats going up and down the rivers to provide the supplies into Europe and out of Europe. So a lot of them would have a little car on the front, and they could lift, when they docked, they could run the car up and down around the town and have it for transportation while it's loading and unloading. And then families live on these. So the whole family, there's one that had a full gym set, swings and all on the back here for the children. Every kind of product you can imagine was on these riverboats. Had to be long and narrow and low for the canals and rivers. Coal. So a lot of ornate building facades. Here's one 1659 with beautiful ornate. Notice the shutters and the hoist hook here for the upper levels. It's beautiful, ornate. And here's a city building, like a little city hall, and ornate clay tile roofs. And then this is a series of 3 buildings. This first one, then 2 more to the right. And these are depicting major sea battles in the history of the Netherlands. There's the middle one, and then the last one. A lot of ornate buildings as you walk around in Amsterdam and other cities. This was 1843 built. So this is the Devil's House in Arnhem. The Nazis took over Arnhem. The movie A Bridge Too Far was written about this, trying to keep the bridge with the Allies. So when they bombed Arnhem, then they did not bomb and did not destroy this building, which is called the Devil's House, and they did not destroy the church here. So we don't know whether maybe they didn't know for sure which side to come down on, or whether maybe this was a church. So they did not bomb the churches or this Devil's House. Really weird house here. The Arnhem Bridge, the movie Bridge Too Far, was about taking this bridge. And 2 soldiers from Birmingham were in the crossing of the Wall River in canvas boats to take Nijmegen Bridge on their way to taking this bridge over the Rhine River. So if you've seen the movie, you'll see them unloading the canvas boats off of some trucks, and they were using those to cross the river. So here's the bridge across there at Arnhem. You'll notice have a wide area for walking and bicycles in addition to the cars. And this is an aerial view of that bridge. So as you'll remember, the Nazis in the book and the movie, the Nazis finally say, bomb Arnhem. And so they then bombed. So all of this is new construction since World War II. But you'll notice down here is a city gate, and that's the one we saw under restoration in amongst. So they did not bomb that, perhaps thinking maybe that was a church and they shouldn't do that. So this is a World War II memorial that was in a hole here that was created by a plane crashing in World War II. We're in the steeple of one of the tall churches looking out of another church, and the airplane flew right between the 2 churches here, between the steeples, and crashed in the ground here, creating a little crater. And so they kept this as a park here, as a memorial, in part to remind people that if we don't keep our guard up, then the same thing can happen to us in the future. Underneath the church from which that picture was taken, there are catacombs underneath the sanctuary, burials. And then this is the bridge at Arnhem. You've already seen this floating drug abuse facility here, drug rehabilitation. We went to Delft, where they make the beautiful pottery. And there's some of it waiting to be fired and decorated. And there's some of the beautiful decorated, done by hand, amazing artisans. And then here's some that are in display case, very reminiscent of houses in Amsterdam. So we're driving along in the bus, and Jill Hoekstra was on our trip, and she's from Birmingham. And she looked out the window and said, "Oh, that's what my grandmother used to do, hanging out the clothes." So the tour guide explained to us that you don't need clothespins when you're hanging the laundry out. What you can do with the rope here, there's multiple strands, you can separate a couple of the strands, put the cloth up through the strand and let it go, and it'll pop back and hold the cloth. So you just untwist the rope strands, and you don't need clothespins. Very practical people. Cube houses in Rotterdam. And then here's the interior of one of those. So, and Amsterdam has something for everyone. So downtown Amsterdam, here's an open air outdoor toilet. So right here at the edge, here at the corner is a little hole. And so you just go in here and you stand and you use the toilet. Okay? So a little bit for everybody. And we saw this part there in Amsterdam, a bus apparently from England with everything reversed. You notice the steering wheel reverse side, the open reverse side, probably came through the channel from England as a sightseeing bus and loading people on a river cruise there. So we'll wind up with this as an illustration that really doesn't have anything to do with the Netherlands, except I took it in the Netherlands. So you may have heard that a boat floats because it displaces the amount of water equal to the mass or weight of the boat. Okay? So we usually don't sense that or see that. We put a boat in the water and we don't notice the water level coming up because it's displaced by the weight of the boat. But here we were going along these eddies along one of the rivers, and the eddies are there to keep it from washing the bank out. So as we came along here past this eddy, our boat started displacing the water ahead of us and displacing the water beyond this eddy. And so as we came past that eddy, we could see the water rushing from this area past the boat to the backside here as it was being displaced. So visually, that water is being displaced by the boat as we moved along, making little white caps here. There was so much being displaced. So apparently, you really don't get to see that often, but here was an illustration of that. So what can we in the United States learn from the Netherlands? Windmills, using windmills and wind-generated power, use of bicycles, use of very small cars, reuse of old buildings for other purposes instead of tearing them down, and then installing the bricks on end without mortar instead of laying them on the side and having to put mortar around them and not having the support. And I was walking along a sidewalk and I saw these also on the top of the dikes. The dikes are made out of, most of them are made out of dirt. They may have a brick cladding on the top, but I saw these little round discs that were driven with a big nail into the sidewalk or the top of the dike, said "Meetpunt." And so I asked one of the people on the ship, one of the locals, I said, "What is meet point? What does that mean?" They said it means meeting point or mark point. So what these are doing is they're marking where the utilities are underneath the sidewalk or underneath the dike. So in the United States, we have a rough idea of where our utilities might be. We take a big backhoe, we start digging until we find them and to repair them. Well, there, a lot of digging for a sidewalk or a street or a dike can be detrimental because you're tearing up something that's significant for handling the water in the country. And so they put these little discs there to mark exactly where the utilities are. So I also have leveed and dike construction without concrete. What do we do in the United States? We build them with concrete. They are protection with vertical poles driven in soil and with jetties to protect the dikes from being washed away. And then the water pumps are based on Archimedes Screw to move a lot of water fast. And the houses and apartment buildings will float, are being built in flood-prone areas along the rivers. Linden trees we saw, pruned for shade and wind protection. Wildlife crossings, we're going to see some examples of that. Eco ducts that they're over a lot of the highways and canals to let the wildlife move back and forth. And rainwater cistern under the old church supply water for the town. And we're they're planning ahead for effects of global climate change. And I understand that the person who is head of the water for the entire country is one of the princes. He's got an engineering background. And you cannot do anything on your property without getting the approval of the water board. And the water board is not what we think of as drinking water. They're the board that handles and controls all the use of water and the pumping out of that water into the canals. Because if you do something on your property that messes that system up, then there's big trouble. So you have to get their approval to do anything on your property that disturbs the soil. And then one of the main things to learn from them is to learn to live with water instead of against it. Okay. So as we see, I'm waking it back up. Sorry. See some examples of what I'm talking about. This is at UAB. So UAB on some of the more recent sidewalks or brick sidewalks, they have put these little discs, these meat points, to indicate that there's a utility right underneath there. So they don't have to dig up all these bricks in the whole area in order to repair that. Notice, however, how are the bricks laid? They're laid flat instead of on edge. So if they had just laid them on edge, then they would have a lot more support than if they're laid flat. And here's some eco ducts in the Netherlands, wildlife crossings going across a major highway here. And you notice this is a bike path, bike and walking path here, also crossing that highway. Another example of one with a bike path here and then the highway here. And here's one allows wildlife to pass under the canal. Notice it's going under the canal as well as the highway going under the canal. And then this is one of the biggest and longest ones in the world. It crosses a road, a railroad, a business park, a river, and a sports complex, all to allow the wildlife to flow back and forth across and not be hampered by all of this construction. And this is in the United States. This is the longest land bridge in the United States. It was built as a park in San Antonio, Texas, and it has walking trails for people made as a part of that, as well as for the wildlife to use. So we can do it. So we were going down a river, and then we turned and went to the right up the next river and on back toward Amsterdam. And so here we were within 3 miles of Germany. So we could see Germany here, but we didn't quite make it to Germany. So on the way home, as many of you may know who fly a lot, the temperature outside the airplane was 32 degrees. We could just barely see up here in the fog and distance here is Greenland. So we were flying the Great Circle, which is the shortest distance from one point to another on the globe because of a plane that cuts through the sphere. Then the shortest point is the Great Circle that is flown generally by the airlines that are going long distances. And we'll end here with the Queen of Night. This is one of the darkest flowers in nature that's been developed as a tulip here. And so Queen of Night is featured here. It's a very dark flower. And we were walking along in Markham and we saw these growing in people's yards. And I understand you actually can buy those in the United States. Okay. So that's it. And I will stop sharing, and I'll answer any questions that anybody may have.